The most dangerous moment in a carefully manufactured life is not when the lies are told, it's when the evidence finally decides it doesn't want to stay silent anymore. And right now, somewhere in a locked digital folder that has been guarded for nearly 8 years, files are waiting. Files that insiders whisper could detonate everything Meghan Markle has spent years building, defending, and protecting. Because this isn't just gossip anymore. This isn't just whispers in palace corridors. This is an investigation. 8 years, hundreds of testimonies, videos, photographs, legal interests. And according to those closest to the files, the moment of release is no longer a question of if. It's a question of when. For years, Meghan Markle's story has been sold as a fairy tale drenched in resilience. The outsider who stormed the monarchy. The actress who became a duchess. The woman who dared to challenge centuries of tradition. But behind the polished interviews and carefully curated speeches, behind the emotional narratives and strategic public appearances, there has always been another story. One that moved quietly, deliberately, and with surgical patience through the shadows. An investigation not driven by tabloids or royal enemies, but by a journalist who refused to let unanswered questions remain buried. Jessica Reed Krauss was never supposed to become the woman holding this kind of power. She started innocently, like so many others, documenting motherhood, suburban chaos, and ordinary life. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Her focus shifted, her curiosity sharpened, and suddenly she wasn't just writing blog posts anymore. She was collecting secrets, and not just any secrets, secrets connected to power, influence, and people whose lives depended on those secrets never seeing daylight. At first, nobody took it seriously. A mommy blogger claiming to investigate a duchess? It sounded absurd, laughable, safe to ignore. But that was exactly how investigations like this survived. Because while the world dismissed her, she kept collecting. Statement after statement, conversation after conversation, testimony after testimony. She listened to former staff, former associates, people who claimed they saw things, people who claimed they experienced things, people who for years had been too afraid to speak publicly. And then in 2018, she created a folder, a simple folder, a chilling title, Yacht Girl. Not a headline, not a blog post, a folder, quiet, hidden, waiting. Inside, according to her own confirmation, were videos. Videos she claims show Meghan in compromising situations. Situations that were never meant for public consumption. Situations that, if verified and released, wouldn't just embarrass Meghan Markle, they would fundamentally reshape how the world understands her rise. But here's the detail that makes this terrifyingly real. Jessica didn't release the files immediately. She didn't rush to publish. She waited. She verified. She cross-checked. She gathered affidavits. She collected legal documentation. She built something far more dangerous than rumors. She built a case. And the existence of that case changed everything. Because once evidence exists, silence stops being protection and starts becoming delay. Behind palace walls, insiders began to whisper. Not publicly, never publicly, but privately, urgently, because the monarchy had already survived scandals, affairs, betrayals. But this was different. This was unpredictable. Because Meghan Markle wasn't just a royal, she was a symbol. And symbols are fragile. They depend entirely on perception, and perception can collapse overnight. For years, Meghan maintained control of her narrative with remarkable precision. Every interview was strategic, every appearance calculated, every emotional confession timed perfectly to maximize sympathy and minimize scrutiny. She wasn't just living a life, she was managing an image, protecting a story, guarding a version of herself that millions believed in without question. But investigations don't care about stories, they care about evidence. And somewhere between the carefully staged charity appearances and the carefully rehearsed speeches, cracks began to form. Subtle at first, barely noticeable. A moment of tension caught on camera, a flicker of irritation, a flash of something beneath the composure. Because maintaining perfection isn't just difficult, it's exhausting. And exhaustion leads to mistakes. Mistakes like the photograph. The photograph that insiders claim shows Meghan Markle on a yacht. Not alone, not randomly, but allegedly in the presence of Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who orchestrated access, curated introductions, and became one of the most infamous figures in Jeffrey Epstein's world. The photograph itself was never aggressively investigated by mainstream outlets. It floated on the margins, ignored, downplayed, treated as coincidence. But insiders claim coincidence doesn't explain proximity, and proximity raises questions. Questions nobody seemed willing to to answer, because answering them would mean acknowledging the possibility that Meghan's rise wasn't as clean as it appeared. And the deeper Jessica Reed Krauss dug, the more disturbing the pattern allegedly became. Connections, overlaps, social circles intersecting in ways that seem statistically unlikely to be accidental. But the most unsettling revelation wasn't the photograph. It was the legal interest. Virginia Giuffre's legal team, the same legal team that pursued justice against Epstein's network, formally expressed interest in Meghan Markle as a potential witness. Not casually, not speculatively, formally. That detail alone sent shockwaves through those paying attention, because legal teams don't express formal interest without reason. And yet the media barely covered it, barely acknowledged it, barely questioned it. Silence, once again, became the loudest sound in the room, because silence protects power. Silence protects reputations. Silence protects institutions that cannot afford to collapse under scrutiny. But silence cannot last forever. And now, after 8 years of collecting, verifying, and waiting, the woman holding the files has signaled something terrifyingly simple. She's ready. She has confirmed the folder exists. She has confirmed the videos exist. She has confirmed the testimonies exist. And confirmation changes everything. Because once existence is acknowledged, denial becomes harder, control becomes weaker, and inevitability begins to creep in. Which brings us to Meghan Markle today. Not the actress, not the Duchess, but the woman standing at the center of a storm that hasn't even fully broken yet. Because insiders have noticed something. A shift, a tension, a subtle unraveling beneath the surface. Moments of visible strain. Moments where composure falters. Moments where control slips just enough to reveal something raw underneath. And those moments matter because they suggest awareness. Awareness that something is coming. Awareness that the narrative she spent years building may soon face its greatest test. Because when evidence emerges, narratives don't survive on emotion. They survive on truth. And truth is rarely kind to carefully constructed illusions. Somewhere right now, those files are waiting. Videos waiting. Photographs waiting. Testimonies waiting for the moment when they are no longer suppressed, no longer ignored, no longer containable. And when that moment arrives, the question won't just be what the investigation reveals. The real question will be why it was hidden for so long. The most chilling part of an investigation isn't the moment the evidence is collected, it's the moment the person at the center realizes the evidence exists. Because from that second forward, every smile becomes heavier, every appearance becomes calculated, every movement becomes a performance designed not to reveal truth, but to survive it. And insiders claim Meghan Markle has been performing survival for years, not because something was proven publicly, but because something existed privately, something dangerous enough that it had to be buried beneath layers of distraction, sympathy, and strategic reinvention. Because Meghan didn't just reinvent her life once. She reinvented it repeatedly. First, as the ambitious actress navigating Hollywood's ruthless hierarchy. Then, as the unexpected royal bride who captured global attention overnight. And finally, as the rebellious outsider who claimed she escaped an institution that refused to protect her. But what if the truth wasn't that simple? Because investigations don't just uncover events, they uncover patterns. And patterns don't lie. Jessica Reed Krauss wasn't just collecting isolated moments, she was allegedly mapping timelines, matching testimonies with travel records, cross-referencing photographs with witness statements, building something prosecutors build, something journalists rarely attempt without absolute confidence in what they're uncovering. Because once you publish something like this, there's no going back. And that's exactly why she waited. 8 years isn't hesitation. 8 years is preparation. It's verification. It's protection against legal retaliation. Because exposing someone with Meghan Markle's level of influence isn't just risky. It's potentially career-ending, financially devastating, legally suffocating. And yet, she kept going, which raises the most terrifying question of all. What did she find that made the risk worth it? Because people don't spend nearly a decade chasing ghosts. They spend nearly a decade documenting reality. Reality that insiders claim wasn't designed for public consumption. Reality that allegedly includes testimonies from individuals who crossed paths with Meghan long before she became untouchable. Reality that allegedly paints a portrait not of innocence, but of calculated assent. Because Hollywood doesn't reward passivity. It rewards strategy. It rewards proximity. It rewards access. And access doesn't happen accidentally. It happens through connections. Connections that open doors. rumors, connections that create opportunity, connections that can't always be explained publicly without raising uncomfortable questions, questions that insiders claim Meghan has spent years avoiding, not answering, avoiding, because answering questions invites scrutiny. Avoidance preserves ambiguity, and ambiguity protects survival. But ambiguity becomes fragile when documentation enters the equation, because documentation doesn't forget, documentation doesn't sympathize, documentation doesn't care about reputation. It simply exists. And according to Krauss, the documentation she possesses isn't limited to rumors or anonymous claims. It allegedly includes sworn testimonies, legal affidavits, statements made under conditions where falsehood carries legal consequences, which changes everything, because sworn testimony isn't gossip. It's evidence waiting for context, evidence waiting for exposure, evidence waiting for the moment when suppression becomes impossible. And that moment may be closer than anyone realizes, because recently, subtle changes in Meghan's public behavior have sparked quiet speculation, not loud enough to become headlines, but noticeable enough to unsettle observers paying attention. Moments where her confidence appeared strained. Moments where her control appeared less absolute. Moments where the carefully maintained image flickered. Because control requires certainty, and certainty becomes impossible when the past threatens to reintroduce itself without permission. Because the most dangerous enemy isn't public accusation. It's documented memory. Memory captured in video. Memory captured in photographs. Memory captured in testimony. Memory that cannot be argued away once seen. And the existence of that memory creates something Meghan cannot fully control. Anticipation. Because anticipation destabilizes everything. It destabilizes alliances. It destabilizes narratives. It destabilizes carefully constructed identities. Because identities built on perception collapse when perception collides with contradiction. And insiders claim Meghan understands this better than anyone. Because she didn't just rise into global prominence, she rose through transformation. Transformation that required leaving parts of her past behind. Transformation that required replacing one narrative with another. Transformation that required absolute control over what the world believed. But control has limits. Limits defined by evidence. Limits defined by truth. Limits defined by the moment when the gatekeeper decides the time for silence has ended. And Jessica Reed Krauss has already signaled that moment is approaching, not with loud declarations, but with quiet confirmation. Confirmation that the folder exists. Confirmation that the investigation exists. Confirmation that the release is no longer hypothetical. It's imminent. And imminence creates panic. Not always visible panic. Not always dramatic panic. But internal panic. The kind that doesn't show on camera. The kind that exists in private conversations. Private legal consultations. Private damage control strategies. Private contingency planning for scenarios nobody wants to face publicly. Because when investigations reach this stage, it's no longer about prevention. It's about survival. Survival of reputation. Survival of credibility. Survival of identity itself. Because Meghan Markle isn't just a person anymore. She's a symbol. And symbols are fragile. They exist only as long as belief exists. Because once belief fractures, symbols collapse instantly. And collapse doesn't happen gradually. It happens suddenly, violently, irreversibly. Because the world doesn't slowly stop believing. It stops believing all at once. And insiders fear that moment may be approaching faster than anyone expected. Because the files have waited long enough. The testimonies have waited long enough. The evidence has waited long enough. And evidence has a way of demanding recognition. Because truth doesn't expire. Truth doesn't weaken. Truth doesn't negotiate. It waits patiently, relentlessly, until the moment arrives when it can no longer be ignored. And according to those closest to this investigation, that moment is no longer years away. It's no longer hypothetical. It's no longer avoidable. It's coming. The only question left isn't whether the world will see the contents of those files. The only question left is what happens to Meghan Markle when it does. Meghan Markle when it does. Meghan Markle when it does. Meghan Markle when it